fear that would take the heart of me. A day may come when the courage of men fails, when we forsake our friends and break all bonds of fellowship. But it is not this day. An hour of wolves and shattered shields when the age of men comes crashing down. But it is not this day. This day we fight. By all that you hold dear on this good earth, I bid you stand! Men of the West!
And good evening, everyone. And stand the man of the West. Welcome to Hearts of Europa. I am Lynx, and with me I have my co-hostess as always.
Hello, this is Katrina. Yes, indeed. Very inspiring speech there from Aragorn. And with us, we of course have our guest for tonight, Loralee Scaife. How are you doing, Loralee?
Hello, Katrina and Lynx. I'm doing very well, and yes, indeed, that is one of the most arousing speeches I think I've ever heard. So we are the men and women of the West, so let us rise.
Absolutely. It definitely comes along with Theoden's speech. That we played last time, definitely mistake. No, the one where you just get to do sound all over. Yes.
Could possibly help men in our time. Of course, the elephant in the room. None of us actually are men. So we shall be interested to hear from actual men in the comments what they're thinking about masculinity and Lord of the Rings. Because we want to know what's useful to you.
And what inspires the men who might be listening.
Yes, indeed. So we were sort of going into some sort of concepts last time with you, Loralee. We got into really, I think, both the masculine and the feminine last time we did a stream. And we were particularly talking about the concept of claiming one's inner queenship or kingship, and kingship, of course, being particularly relevant to today. So perhaps we could sort of get into what that is and what being a king of oneself really means to you.
Yes. Well, first off, I just wanted to say a little bit about how masculine and feminine in terms of principles or aspects of the human psyche in men and women, women have within them an inner masculine that must also rise to kingship. So everything that we're going to be talking about today applies to the inner masculine in women. And I think this is really important to understand, just as it is important for men to understand that there is an inner feminine in them or an inner queen. And when we can turn our attention to that as an inner dynamic and bring that more to consciousness, then we are going to be much more capable of behaving in a way that is kingly and queenly in the outer world and in our engagements with the outer world in these very dangerous times. We are all being called to our greatness, and no one is exempt.
Absolutely. And we've often sort of stressed on this show, on many occasions, the importance of balance as well.
Mhm.
And we do all have, we're not 100% on the totally masculine or the totally feminine side of things, because that's not how it works. It's not in my view, unless you happen to be the literal embodiment of the divine masculine force or the divine feminine force.
Mhm. In
That
which
is a
case you wouldn't be in a body.
Nope.
yeah, that's a bit hard for a human being to
That's
do.
right.
So, and you know, it also pertains to society, because the forces of the feminine and the masculine is always in. I wouldn't say a struggle. That is the wrong word, but it's a back and forth, and we need to keep it within center, not going too far off in either side. These days, of course, it is way over to the feminine. So I want to try to, with the little voice that I have, try to, you know, get us all back to the middle, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the ultimate goal, just in seeking maturity as a man or a woman, is all about holding the tension of the opposites. And the opposites of masculine and feminine are more, let's say, obvious because, well, at least in my opinion, I know it's not particularly popular these days, but men and women are different. Their bodies
Yes.
look different. Their bodies function differently. Their brains function differently. And so they are complementary. And this idea of complementarity is really at the root of holding the tension of the opposites. So we definitely don't want to be overly identified with one end or the other. And in fact, it's also essential that we understand that there's not going to be a place like where you get there and it's all perfect. That fulcrum that is at the center between the opposites, that fulcrum is a moving target. It's not something that we get there. I mean, that's kind of a linear way of thinking. It's like, okay, we're going to get to the fulcrum and we're going to be all balanced and everything's going to be fine after that. Well, no, because it's through the balancing of the opposites that we grow in consciousness and that we also grow emotionally and psychologically. So this idea of holding the tension of the opposites is it's most obvious in terms of masculine feminine that we're going to dive into a little more today, but we also see it in other aspects, the tension of the opposites between the inner, that is our inner world, and the outer world, and the tension of the opposites between spirit and matter, or our body. So we are creatures, we're animals with consciousness, or with this spirit, or this capacity to contact what we might call the divine, or that which is not in the physical realm. We could call that the capital S self, but it doesn't matter what you name it. the the idea is we are always called upon to be balancing the tension of the opposites, and that's what individuation really means. And indeed, at the impulse of the hero's journey and the shero's journey is primarily about balancing the opposites of shadow and ego, of self and other. So there's a whole pile of opposites that as a mature adult, we need to be always engaged in this balancing of the opposites in whatever way it shows up. And then, of course, the idea is, or at least the goal, is to be able to apply whatever action is necessary in the whatever incident shows up. So it's not always appropriate in dealing with something that comes at us either from the external or the internal to go at it like a warrior waving his sword. Sometimes that's called for, but other times it's the need of the feminine. The feminine needs to be called forth to deal with
Mm.
something that comes up from the inside or the outside. So it's that receptive component that is a part of the feminine, whereas the masculine is the assertive component.
It's
No.
fun- it's funny because I heard a similar argument about Putin the other day, actually.
Oh, really? Interesting.
He is a very masculine man. I think everyone can agree on
Uh-huh.
that.
Yeah.
but but his protection of Russia is quite feminine. Then he goes into that nurturing, more feminine side of it. And it's an argument I haven't heard before, but it was definitely interesting.
It is indeed. And I'd just like to sort of call back to the point about the inner and the outer, because that is certainly a one. You know, how concerned should we be with the inner world, and
Yeah.
how concerned should we be with the material world is something that a lot of religions and philosophies have debated over
Mm-hmm.
for absolute ages. And I think it maybe has something to do with the masculine and the feminine as well, in sort of the different approaches taken uh, to materiality, whether you bend it to your will, whether you accept what is dealt to you, whether you go about the world detached from it or engaging with it, and to what extent. I suppose those sort of active and passive attitudes could again be linked to the masculine and the feminine. So it is all interconnected, I do think.
Yeah, and the issue of balancing that tension is a matter of choice in the moment. It's not, again, you can't say that, oh, the inner is feminine and the outer is masculine. It's not that cut and dried. So if we visualize even this idea of like a seesaw with these one side balanced by the other and the fulcrum in the middle, and thinking about it as that fulcrum is moving, and our job as mature human beings is to try to stay um, close to that fulcrum, or maybe even say that we could follow the fulcrum and be always watching the extremes on either end. Like, okay, we've got the extreme expression of the masculine, that aggressive, assertive, um, form building component, and then the extreme of the feminine, which is the nourishing instincts. And the two of those ideally, and this is why we talk about kingship and queenship, because it's the highest and most mature manifestation of masculine and feminine psychology, and the work to get there is always being able to see, okay, there's this extreme over here, this maximum masculine, and then this maximum feminine, and both have to work together all the time in every situation.
Hmm. Yeah, because certainly if you completely lack in an active instinct, even as a woman, there's going to be certain situations in which you cannot act. And if you lack in any form of nurturing as a man, well, that's going to make you a pretty unpleasant person to be around,
Yeah.
most certainly.
And in the masculine, the say negative end of that is anti-life. It's destructive as opposed to creative. If there's no contact with the inner feminine, or what we're going to be talking about today, the lover aspect of the masculine principle, then there's just like no capacity really for even for compassion.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yes.
It definitely makes me think of the flowing aspect of the feminine. So if that is lacking, everything stagnates, everything becomes hard and immovable. And I definitely think that is some of the things that will definitely show itself in being very hard and unmovable.
Mm. So you mentioned that the lover aspect, and we did sort of bring that up when we had a little chat prior to the stream, and the nurturing masculine, and what that looks like as appropriate for a man, and how a man nurtures and supports, was something that we wanted to get into, most
Yes.
certainly. Would you mind
Well,
expanding on that? Yeah.
sure. And it is important, and just the word lover tends to conjure up perhaps the wrong images because it's not, we tend to think of both love and the lover as having to do with romance and sexual expression. But what the lover in this context really means is the capacity for the individual to, first of all, be fully present in their body. You have to be embodied in order to appreciate being alive. So the lover archetype in men and women, it is about that. It's the ability to be able to experience the rapture of all of the senses, and to really see the sacred, the blessing that has been given to us as human beings, to have our senses, the five senses that are built in to our physical body. And this has been taught through spiritual practices for thousands of years in just about every tradition. And just simply breathing and bringing yourself back into your body, and the capacity to appreciate being alive in the moment. So that's primarily what the lover is. And then from there, it goes into the, say, romantic or sexual component. But that's not the romantic and sexual aspect, is not the primary thing that we want to think about in terms of the lover archetype. And this ability to be present, to be in your body, to love your own body and enjoy being in that body, is essential
Mm.
to have a healthy love relationship with another. Because if you're not
Absolutely.
feeling alive in your own body, then you're going to have a hard time feeling that aliveness in the other, in your beloved. And then that winds up creating a whole lot of other problems that men and women experience in their relationships these days.
And it's certainly something that people struggle to get in touch with these days. It sounds
Mhm.
like, because there are many altered images of bodies floating about. There are a
Mm.
lot of devices and a lot of things keeping us in our head a lot of the time.
That's
I
right.
know I struggle with being in my head like quite a
Me
lot of the
too.
time. And
Me
so
three.
people are just, yeah, exactly. All of us struggle with it. So people are just constantly pulled in by devices and stuff and distracted from actually feeling themselves in the
Yeah.
moment,
It
which
also
is quite unique
show.
grounding for both men and women. Yeah.
Mm.
Oh yeah, it's also seen in overeating and
Oh, yeah.
people going into excess with everything, porn addiction,
Yes.
etc., etc. And I do think for many it's um, a sense of lacking inside, so that they're not fully able to be here and now, and yet they are basically trying to use their senses. They're absorbed in their senses, but in a very unhealthy way. It's not, how to put it? It's not in balance. Um, it's warped. And I do think that balance is sorely needed now.
Yeah, it sure is. And I would say that this is by design. This is not an accident that we have been, or that we find ourselves in the situation that we're in. That the what I call the forces of evil have been working full time to create this division uh, between the opposites.
Oh,
Because
yeah.
if you can't come to wholeness in any way, then it's much easier to control people, to dominate and control and manipulate. So this is the main task, this balancing of the opposites in every component.
Absolutely. And those who are finding a way to do that uh, definitely have to try to help as many as possible to also do that in the capacity they have. Um, because it can be very difficult to come to this by yourself.
Yes.
Um, I know I struggled a lot with growing up in a very feminist society. And I knew even as a kid that the view of femininity I was shown was very warped. It was trying to be very masculine and everything, and finding my way through that on my own was very difficult. And I can only assume that it is the same for
Yes.
men,
Right.
and in particular with the way they
Mm.
are attacked these days. They are under
Mm.
constant attack, and it
Yes.
pisses
Oh
me
yeah.
off. It pisses me
We're
off.
we're always being
Yeah.
told to do the exact opposite of what we're inclined to do. So women are told to go into masculine professions, and
Mm.
men are encouraged to be doing things that men just don't want to do, the
Right.
majority of them.
Right. And the assault on young men is just so horrifying, with this transgender business, and how little boys are being taught that all things masculine are bad, or reprehensible. And so they're being taught at such a young age that who they are in their own body is wrong. and bad. And I think this is leading to a lot of the gender confusion, this gender dysphoria, and we have to know that, and men have to know that. This, as I mentioned and discuss in my episode on masculine kingship in Lord of the Rings, that men are under attack, not only psychologically with this, hyper feminist ideology and all this transgender stuff. I mean, just the programming itself is bad enough, but they're also under attack from contaminants in the environment, and how that has contributed to the diminution of testosterone, estrogens, phytoestrogens in the environment through all the contaminants, how this is changing men's bodies. I mean, they now talk about man boobs that are
Yeah.
a consequence of the contaminants in the food and the water and you name it. And since it's the information, just the actual facts, the knowledge of this kind of chemistry and how it affects the male body, the male hormones, and endocrine system, the brain, that this is it's almost a full-on constant assault that has been going on for decades, and we're now seeing the consequences of that in boys, young men, and especially children. So,
Not only that, I just want to interject one thing here. With the promotion of basically just sitting around, being on a computer or a screen, will also lower testosterone in men when they exercise, and in particular weight training and everything.
yeah,
Their testosterone will swell. So with we've seen the memes of how the nerds won against the chads and all of that. Getting people just sitting on their asses, to put it bluntly, definitely has a very bad effect on men as well when it
oh, it
comes
sure
to
does.
come to the hormonal balance.
Absolutely. Certainly a lot of ways in which the general attack on masculinity is affecting men. And I kind of wonder how the characters in Lord of the Rings are living in a time when it's very hard to be a good man, and sort of how they deal with it and how that might help men of today.
Right.
And one of the characters we were very focused on was Aragorn in particular. He's embodying and trying to balance like a lot of the archetypes within himself during the course of the films.
Right. And Aragorn is the archetype of the king and how a man becomes a king. And that is by engaging the hero's journey. And the hero's journey requires facing the shadow. And the shadow is that part of the self that is not necessarily bad. And I think this is a really important point for people to understand, because there's a lot of talk, oh, the shadow and this, oh, the shadow here and the shadow there. Well, in terms of the psyche, the shadow is not necessarily bad, but rather the shadow personifies those aspects of the self that have not been allowed to have expression, particularly in childhood. So anything that is not allowed to be expressed doesn't go away. It simply drops down below the level of awareness, where it motivates our behavior in ways that we don't understand. So the hero's journey is first this confrontation with these parts of the self that, because they have been repressed, they don't grow up. And consequently, we're going about, so we grow up, we have our childhood, some things are being repressed, we chronologically grow up, go out into the world, but meanwhile, down in the unconscious are these primitive, immature, childlike aspects of the self that if we don't go in, turn within to meet those and help them mature, meaning bring them into consciousness, then you basically never grow up. Your life is dominated by these primitive, immature, um, childlike components that are always going to be seeking safety, security, and comfort from the outside. And this is how we've been manipulated, is by the powers that shouldn't be, because the people have been infantilized. People have been kept in this infantile state, uh, depotentiated, and always looking for big mommy and big daddy to take care of things on the outside so that we don't have to do that really challenging inner work that is depicted in The Lord of the Rings, certainly by Aragorn, but all the characters undergo their own hero's journey, and the female characters their shero's journey in order to rise to that mature manifestation of king and queen. But it's not easy. And I think that the Lord of the Rings depicts that in a very real way. I mean, they all struggle and suffer. And so it's not just a story of, yay, here's the big strong man, and he goes off and conquers the evildoers and live happily ever after. That's not really what the story is about.
No. You can tell a story like that in just one movie. If it
Yeah.
was just conquering the dark forces and everything.
Mhm.
And I think that is one aspect of what we see from Frodo at the end of the story, in that his wound was too big. It shows that it's a real cost.
Yeah.
So it's not just everyone goes home and everything is hunky-dory, Uh,
Mm.
and I definitely hone in on what you say with being obsessed with security.
Mhm.
We definitely see that now with
Oh
children
boy, no
in
kidding.
daycare. I've seen around where I live. They go with, the yellow vests
Oh
outside.
no.
Yeah,
Oh my God.
outside with a fence around them. It's just that they're outside the building and they have to wear a bloody security vest. It's ridiculous.
It is
Uh,
ridiculous.
and the obsession is, it it makes me so frustrated. Um, Life is supposed to be dangerous. There
Yeah.
is a real danger by being alive. And
Mm.
when you get people obsessed with living a secure life, everything is supposed to be fluffy and warm and nice,
Mm.
where you don't really challenge yourself, you definitely end up being very neurotic. And I
Oh yeah.
do think that is something that we see manifesting very much today
Oh yeah.
in
Yeah.
the current circumstances.
Just checking some of the stuff from the guys in the chat.
Mm.
DDJ is advocating for Samwise as one of the real heroes of the story. And
Interesting. Yeah, the
and
loyal, yeah, the
the
loyal friend,
paradox
ally.
the paradox is talking about the book Iron John, and the first
Oh
step being to get a boy
yes.
away from his mother.
Mm.
I've
That's
never
really
read that book.
interesting. Oh, well, that's really interesting because I've been thinking about that. Uh, what actually launched what was described at the time, and this is like the late 1980s, early 1990s, when Robert Bly came out with Iron John, and that launched what was being called the mythopoetic men's movement. And what's really interesting to me is that prior to that, in the say late 80s and whatnot, um, myself and many of my friends and colleagues as women, we were deep into goddess mythology and the feminine in all her aspects, and this was opening up, or at least that feminine psychology was opening up, and women were really getting deep into what does it mean to be a woman. And as a consequence of that, we would talk amongst ourselves like, what happened to the men? Here we are, we're doing our work, we're doing our inner work, but where's the men? Because we were looking around at that time, this is 30 years ago, and seeing what was happening to men, the beginnings of the very things that we're seeing manifest now. But what took place then was this emergence of dealing with the masculine, and that began with Iron John, Robert Bly, and this mythopoetic men's movement. Robert Moore was a major part of that, and I reference Robert Moore's amazing work, King, Warrior, Magician, Lover, because I think it's a masterpiece in understanding masculine psychology. So this was all coming out uh, in that time, in the early to mid 90s, and it was wonderful. It was incredible. Men were meeting together. They were talking amongst themselves about their feelings and all of these issues that were beginning to surface. And then we would come together as men and women, and we did things like drumming and dancing and talking. There were lectures and conferences and this sort of thing, and it was a wonderful time. But then it just kind of disappeared. So by the
Yeah.
time we got to the new millennium, it seemed like all of that just disappeared into the past, and it was not carried forward. And I always wondered about that. It was not carried forward. So now we've got to resurrect that whole era with the important work of people like Robert Bly. James Hillman was another one. The Jungian people, Robert Moore. These were the people who were really helping men reconnect with their kingship. But then it just seemed to disappear, or it was repressed. So what we're having to do now is, first of all, try to understand why was that all repressed? What happened to crush that rising flame of kingship that was coming forth in men, and then the counterpart in women, and bring that back so that we have some, first of all, psychological context for all of this, and then reviving these myths and stories, like the work the two of you are doing on Hearth of Europa, telling the stories. And this is happening elsewhere as well. We're hearing a lot more about stories, myths, fairy tales from
Yeah.
our ancestors that,
I've noticed more people becoming interested in them. Most
yes,
certainly. And
thank
I think
goodness.
it's because they don't relate to the inauthentic archetypes of men and women that
Right.
are being put out to them in
Uh-huh.
modern media. They don't have heroes and heroines that they can actually relate to.
Yeah,
Right.
Hollywood is basically just anti-heroes.
Mm.
and now they've switched that over to the anti-heroine.
Yeah.
I have actually seen the remnants of what you're talking about with men's groups and women's groups, and then they coming together. I wasn't part of it myself, but I knew some people up in Trondheim
Oh,
who had men's groups and women's groups. I
great.
can't, of course, not say what the men talked about. If they, many men today cringe a bit about quote unquote talking about your feelings, and I definitely get that. But there's definitely a way for men to tap into that is male. And
Absolutely.
personally, as a woman, I don't feel competent to speak about that.
No.
You know, they will find their way. I also see that tendency re-emerging because it was definitely repressed. For the men, it disappeared entirely. For the women, they seem to have gone into groups, sitting in a circle, looking at their vaginas or something.
Oh God. Yeah. Mm.
For the
So
women, there seems to have been maybe a tipping towards everything being very overly feelings based,
That's
and
right.
the masculine seems to have reacted to this by going, nope, feelings bad,
Yeah. Yeah.
feelings bad.
Well, and I
And
think it's really
yeah,
important, again, to understand that men and women are different. And for us as women, and this is something that I learned during that period in the 90s, just from the psychology and everything that I was studying, that that women relate certainly out of feelings, and we tend to relate to each other in a sort of face to face, eyeball to eyeball, talking a lot about I'm feeling this because of that, and a real dissection of all the feelings and how they work, and that's what women do generally when they get together. But we then have a tendency to expect our men to be relating that way to us, and it's not appropriate. Men tend to relate to each other and talk about their feelings in a different way that is more what is described as shoulder to shoulder. So men tend to get together and do stuff. They do things together, or they have projects together, or they go
yeah,
fishing, or they go hunting. And in the course of doing that, they talk with each other about what's important. And it's not the same sort of dissecting of, oh, she said this and I felt that, and then this happened and I felt this. That is not the the masculine way. And I'd love to hear the men in the chat or who are listening, to comment on that, the difference between, or at least to share some of their own thoughts about how men connect with each other and feel that really powerful sense of male bonding. That's another characteristic that I
yeah,
love about the Lord of the Rings, is how it portrays male to male bonding that is not erotic.
yes.
It's non-erotic, but it is a powerful and profound experience and deeply emotional. And
And
I think that both Tolkien and Peter Jackson really captured that in Lord of the Rings.
yeah, and certainly Frodo and Samwise would
Yes.
be probably the main example of that in the film, but also
Yeah.
Legolas and Gimli and the whole Fellowship, really, as
Yeah.
a bunch of guys
Hmm.
bonds. And Merry and Pippin already seemed to have a strong
Hmm.
masculine friendship
Hmm.
going on.
And of
Which
course,
is
Aragorn and Boromir.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they sort of they do have a bit of a kind of a I guess there's awkwardness in that relationship, given as Boromir's dad is ranged against
Yeah.
Aragorn and his line, and
Yeah.
Aragorn's dealing with a lot of shame and fear, I guess, or whether he's
That's
going to be
right.
like his ancestors. And
Yeah.
Boromir is dealing with a lot of pressure as his father's sort of favorite son,
Mhm.
and they're sort of having to work through that together.
Yeah, and they carry each other's shadow as each of those characters, Boromir and Aragorn carry each other's shadow. Gimli and Legolas carry each other's shadow. They're opposites. And so again, it's not that the shadow is bad, but it is something that we see in another that we're either afraid of or that we don't want to own. And particularly between Aragorn and Boromir, what Boromir saw in Aragorn was what he wanted to become, this wise and compassionate leader. And but he
Mm.
was not, he had not developed himself to become that. He was filled with hubris based on the projection that his father placed on him. So he was not a mature man.
Yeah.
He was fulfilling something that was projected onto him that he was not in touch within himself. So he became filled with hubris, and hubris is the downfall of the men of the West.
Yeah.
And yeah,
I will
and then
also say,
Aragorn.
W-
No, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I would just going to add that Boromir also holds resentment to his father
Yeah,
in placing all of that, which is seen in the scene with Faramir before
yeah,
he is sent over to Rivendell. So
yeah.
that is part of Boromir's shadow. He has not fully found his 2 feet at that point.
That's right. Yeah. Well, and Aragorn then sees in Boromir his shadow, his hubris, his possible hubris, because it was that hubris that took down Isildur. And Aragorn feared that he would be susceptible to that same hubris. And as a result, then he would be the one who failed the test and brought 1,000 years of darkness to the world. So that was Aragorn's fear, and he saw in Boromir that he Boromir is what I could become if I don't deal with my own tendencies in that
Mm.
regard.
I just kind of wonder how many lads kind of can relate to Boromir in certain expectations maybe from their fathers,
Mm,
or their fathers sort of putting themselves onto them.
yeah.
Um, DDJ in the chat agrees that men don't really tend to go into details.
Mm-mm.
They
No, and
don't.
I
Yeah.
would say it's transmitted uh, even say less in words and more in like their physical ways of being together, like more
Mm.
energetic or maybe even kinesthetic. So I'd like to hear from the men at what their thoughts
Yeah.
are in that.
Well, the paradox reckons there's been a fear narrative used to get men out of the classroom. I guess that maybe means teachers and stuff, because you don't see an awful lot of male teachers. I think most of the time, from what I've seen in schools, and in secondary schools even as well. There just
Mm.
isn't a lot of male teachers, so you got young teenage boys being mentored by mostly women,
Yeah.
which is not a great thing. Like, there's an argument for
No.
this sort of like setup that we used to have in Britain of, these same-sex schools.
Yeah.
Boys went their boys'
Yeah.
school and the girls went their girls' school, and they had their private space to work out things that were very specific to that sex.
Mhm. Yeah, I agree. I think there was some value in that separation of boys and girls, especially in the early stages. It's a lot to do with the loss of initiation rites. We don't have appropriate initiation rituals for men or women to enter into adulthood. So as a result, many are simply arrested at an infantile stage of development. They never really actually complete the process of adolescence. So we see it all
Yeah.
around us, right? Young men, even older men and women
Dancing
who
Penguin
are
says, "Oh no, do I got to talk about feelings here?" Not the feelings. No.
yeah. But what about this idea of something that's kinesthetic that happens between men, that's less about talking and dissecting all the feelings, but it's more like feel there's a difference between feelings. In fact, this is parsing the language, because we tend to think of feelings as being all about emotions, but actually feelings are the also a kinesthetic component of the actual physical body. I mean, feelings as in kinesthetics, touching stuff and feeling things in the body.
It does
Hmm.
make sense to me, where women tend to use 1,000 words to describe one little thing.
Mm,
Men seem to use one word or very few
right.
words to describe a plethora of things.
Yeah.
So when a man gives a short sentence, in particular, other men will pick up on what he means by that,
Hmm.
outside of just the words, but also the meaning behind the entire sentence.
Mm.
And a woman will react, he's not saying anything.
Yeah. He
Yes.
never
He's not.
talks to me.
He's not
We've
sharing.
Yeah.
we've
Yeah.
we've all done that. There is a certain point where you do somewhat need to make a concession with your woman on this, menfolk.
Oh,
Yeah.
absolutely. Oh, for sure. But
If
that
she's
is
if
part of
she's
the
repeatedly
sacred.
asking you how you're feeling, you might be in trouble if you don't spit it out eventually.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's
Yeah.
something that kind of communication is what should be happening within the context of the
Mm.
sacred relationship that a man and a woman build together.
Yeah.
Yeah. And also
Yeah. Sorry.
women keep not touch with uh pick up on the tone much more
Mhm.
than men.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
so what a man can just state as a matter of fact, not criticizing or angry or anything like that, a woman will take offense to simply because of the tone. But if he
Possibly
says,
guilty.
yeah, me too. I can be a bit harsh at times and not really meaning it. But um, if they use, for example, with an insult in a fight, also,
Mm.
if they're saying it in aggressive tone, of course the woman will be upset. But if they say, "Oh, you're just like this, aren't you?" A bit more, haha, then he will actually get a giggle. So,
Mm.
just wanted to highlight something from Yankee Apple in the chat, who's mentioned
Mhm.
a very traditional way in which men have always bonded.
Mhm.
Yankee Apple bonded with other men in the military, and that was very that was a very deep bond. And of
Mhm.
course, we do see how fighting together bonds men in Lord
Mhm.
of the Rings as well.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
a life or death situation side by side with one another, and that's one of the main ways I think in possibly in which men used to bond, which not many of them have anymore. More of
Right.
them would have been both warriors and farmers
Mhm.
in the past.
Mhm. That's an important point. Yeah. They were warriors and farmers and fathers and brothers. And yeah, it wasn't just that one thing. So this speaks to the compartmentalization of our world and the diminishment of masculine power and potency as the essence of what it means to be a man is that you are a protector of the realm. That's what gives meaning and purpose to a man's life is you build a realm and then you protect that realm together with other men, and the realm is where life can grow. And that's where the feminine, that's where women have their power, is in the creation and of family, of relationship. So the women tend to the relationship, the relating component of the community, which is less hierarchical. And I think that this business of hierarchy should be addressed as well, because again, we're getting the sense from our conditioning that somehow hierarchy, any kind of hierarchy, is bad, that there should
Men,
never be any
yeah,
hierarchy. Everybody has to be completely and totally
but
100%
men
equal.
always iron out a hierarchy. You notice
Yeah,
them
they're
doing it
designed
as
that
well.
way.
You notice them doing it when they're talking to each other. They're sort
Hmm.
of getting the measure of who's okay, who seems to be best at this in the group, and who's that, and who's provisionally the leader here. That
Yes.
type of thing. You can sort of see the cogs turning in their heads.
Yeah, and it's so important because that's what men are designed to do, that is to scope out who's skilled at what, like Aragorn does with his involvement with the Fellowship. He doesn't just roll in there and say, "Okay, everybody, I'm the king. You must obey me." No, instead, he recognizes and acknowledges each of the members, their individual skill set, and it blesses them and encourages them to rise to their own greatness by developing to the fullest capacity their particular skills and gifts. And because of that, the men of the fellowship and the people um, encourage and support Aragorn as a leader. So men will scope out, just by their natural instincts, um, to identify who is a man who would be king, who is a man who is competent at that particular job. And it doesn't diminish any of the other men. It's just like not every man is a leader in that capacity. And men who are not going to step up to claim the throne, that doesn't mean they're lesser men. It simply means that they've identified how kingship needs to be expressed in their own life, and that a wise, competent leader is going to draw the support of other men, because the other men instinctively know that, okay, here's somebody who is competent. Here's somebody who is, not lording over me, but instead he's blessing the skills of each man that he is trying to bring together to do the work of creating and protecting the realm.
Yeah, as I mentioned in our pre-chat, I think there's one scene in The Two Towers that show this very well. In particular, when it comes to the initiation part for boys.
Mm,
In Helm's Deep, they are practically just sitting waiting for the enemy to attack. They know they're
right.
coming, they know they are massively outnumbered and everything. And that boy, I think is 15 in the story, basically says to Aragorn, there isn't really any hope, or what? Really wanting guidance. And Aragorn doesn't answer in, oh, it's going to be fine, just we're going to
Right.
win. He doesn't do that because he knows the danger is real. You know, the boy knows the danger is real.
Right.
But he takes the sword and do a few practice strokes with it and everything, and says, "This is a strong sword." So basically saying without words again in the manly way, "We are in danger, but you have a good sword, and we will fight. We won't just
Yes.
roll over and give up."
Yeah, that is a powerful scene. Very powerful scene on a lot of levels. First of all, the sword, just the symbol of the sword it's a phallic symbol, and that is the initiation into manhood, which should be taking place through some kind of initiation rites or rituals. That is when the elder men give the young men their power. The power of the sword is the phallus. This is their ability to claim their masculinity and to move out into the world with that strength, and power. And in that scene, that is Aragorn being like the initiator who, well, and I think this is played out also in a lot of native traditions where the when it came time for the boys to be initiated, the warriors would come and the wise men and everything would come and take the boy from the mother and say, okay, now you got to go out. We're giving you a little bag of
Mm.
something or other. You got to go out into the forest on your own. And if you survive, then you will be welcomed into the tribe as an initiated warrior. So it wasn't, you didn't put him in a little yellow vest and a
No.
mask and bubble wrap and keep him behind a fence.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I think
Uh,
also. Sorry, next. Yeah.
no, just finished. I just thought it would be a good time to play the clip on Sword and Tolkien's prescience, but just
Ah,
finish your
Ah,
nice.
thought before that.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that we did of course used to have initiatory rites for young men and women in Europe as well, and
mm-hmm.
young men would go off and go and learn in a way which most men are more suited to doing. They would become apprentices. They would
Yeah,
learn in that sort of a way, and I think it brings it back to what the paradox said about stop treating boys like defective girls.
girls.
Oh
They're gonna
yeah.
have. They're gonna. I think the education system certainly does that these days.
Yeah.
It doesn't recognize that boys and girls have to take separate paths in life. So it
Mm-hmm.
tries to get boys to sit nice and neatly in a classroom and
Mm-hmm.
wonders why it doesn't work when throughout most of history their initiation right has been right, you're gonna go out to work and learn with your father now.
Mm-hmm.
You're gonna learn
Yeah.
our trade, you're gonna learn how to plow.
Mm-hmm.
In
And
the
ooh,
60s,
yes, Stevie.
here in Norway, there was 7 years of schooling, and that was obligatory. And then you could either go in and learn a trade or continue with your education. And that was only for the quote unquote smartest people.
Mm.
And boys, they want to see. Some of them got apprenticeship on a ship and sailed off and came back a man. They don't do that anymore.
No.
And I definitely think that is an aspect that is missing in today's schooling, and also for girls. Girls aren't automatically suited to sit behind the desk and memorize stuff. We
Right.
have our strengths as well that we could develop in a much better way. So that is definitely something
Absolutely.
that needs changing.
Absolutely.
But shall we go over to the clip from Loralee's fantastic video series? This is from part 1 on masculinity. We do have some clips and I completely forgot over an hour in. So yeah, let's hear from Loralee. Okay, for some reason it doesn't show up here.
I saw a bit of it just then on YouTube.
Yeah, seems to be a bit lagging, and now it doesn't appear at all. Just give me 1 second and I will find it.
The techs.
Yeah, when I don't boomer, the tech boomers. Okay.
The fertility and strength of the king. Others. A castrated man cannot defend the life force. The fertility and strength of the king is represented by his sword. Theoden, king of Rohan, is rendered weak and impotent under the spell of Saruman via his servant Grima Wormtongue, who administers the equivalent of psychological and biological castration. Theoden remembers his true self upon grasping his sword. Today, the meaning of grasping your sword is the exercise of educating yourself on how men are being depotentiated and take action to resist and warn others. A castrated man cannot defend the life force. Tolkien's prescience on the loss of kingship is evident in Return of the King. The once great kings of Númenor became obsessed with a desire for immortality and lost touch with their true purpose, that is, to steward their realms. Abandoning their sacred duty left them vulnerable to the treachery of Sauron. The obsession for immortality today appears in the form of transhumanism and will likely lead to a similar end. Aragorn was the last hope to restore the grandeur of the kings of old. In our time, the men of the West must rediscover sacred kingship in order to expose and defeat the 21st century version of evil. The work of resisting evil
I'm sorry, it seems I'm a bit boomer today, even though I promised myself I wouldn't do that. But yeah, I did manage to get the audio going, and then get back to the right scene. So yeah, I do think there are many valid and good points are raised in that clip. So yeah, and you know how important it is for men to find their inner strength, which is definitely and well represented by the sword. And okay, my mind just went a bit blank there. It does tend to happen when I do have my
Well, maybe
little.
I can pick up on something there regarding the sword, and we did touch on it earlier about the sword as a symbol of phallic masculinity and the ultimate innate power of a man. So and one of the major themes in the whole Lord of the Rings myth is the broken sword, Narsil. That is a symbol of castration. And we have talked earlier today about how castration is manifesting in our time through the contaminants in the environment, the psychological warfare, the uh, um, pornography. These are the things that are breaking the sword or castrating men. So all the sword symbolism in Lord of the Rings is really about men connecting to this power within them and honoring that as not as something that you don't have the sword as an object of destruction. It's not an object of destruction. It is a symbol of power, and that the recognition of that power and the ownership of that power comes as a consequence of the hero's journey and doing that inner work. Otherwise, the sword becomes a weapon for destruction. And the the warrior traditions that are most obvious now in the martial arts. And there's a lot of martial arts going on these days. Um, Men and women too, but I think it's especially important for men to be learning about martial arts in and mixed martial arts and all of these combinations that are now being uh, well, they're available. Well, maybe not anymore because of the COVID. People can't actually gather and practice and do these things, at least not in a normal way. But nevertheless, this claiming of the sword is a manifestation of a man getting in touch with his power and learning how to wield power in a healthy way. The idea of the warrior in terms of martial arts traditions, I mean, it has been said something to the effect of a true warrior fights with his mind first before using the sword, and that a mature warrior very often never has to use the sword because he's so skilled at navigating the terrain of whatever it is that is attacking him or threatening him. He's able to draw on different aspects of himself, which probably boil down to the king, the warrior, the magician, the lover, to assess the situation at hand. And a skilled warrior, at least in these days, is a man who is able to navigate that terrain, to recognize danger and threat, and to measure it in terms of how he himself is going to address that threat. For the most part, you don't want to be roaring around with your hair on fire and you're flailing your sword and hacking away at stuff. That is not a mature warrior. But a man who's mastered his inner king, warrior, magician, lover holds the sword, carries the sword, like Aragorn carries Anduril. He shows the sword, and just in the seeing of the sword, that integrated power in the man, it offsets what could result in violence. I think this is really important these days, and also thinking of the word sword. Well, if you take the S off the front and put it on the back, you have words. So the swords of our time are words, and the mastering of language to dispel potential violence. And why are our words now being censored, and bad words are being demonized? Like, we're being told that you can hurt someone with a word that somebody deems hateful. This is just outrageous. So men and women, but I think especially men, because men have that capacity for logic and reason and the use of language in a way that's different from women, because we as women tend to speak and talk out of more of a feeling mode. And men have to develop that skill of using language in a powerful way to protect the realm from violence.
Well, words and language definitely have power, but saying what someone might feel is a bad word isn't the same as pulling a knife or a
That's
gun
right.
at someone. But
Mhm.
these days you could definitely start to wonder if the former is worse than the latter, and it's just silliness. Then we get back to the point of having an overly security focused society where nothing bad is allowed to happen.
Yeah.
You have to know how to deal with bad words, how to
Yeah.
deal with that kind of adversity. It's part of growing up.
Yeah.
Trying to eliminate that is frankly childish. And, and in particular with men, as you say, I do think that the skilled warrior back in the day didn't have to use a sword because he knew how to handle the situation, but also I think because with his bearing, how he holds
Mm.
himself, other
Right.
people will know that he knows how to use that sword
Exactly.
and think twice before they
Uh-huh.
challenge him further,
Mhm.
unless
Yeah.
you're also a skilled warrior or think you're a skilled warrior. So that is part of, perhaps I should say, the school of power or something. When you learn how to uh, wield that sort of power,
Yeah.
that is the sword.
Mhm.
You also have to learn how to use it in the best way and not just for your own pleasure.
We certainly have the hobbits in Lord of the Rings who'd never so much as encountered a sword,
Yeah.
and they have to get handed mini swords, which are technically daggers to humans.
Mhm.
So they're sort of like emblematic of a boy, I guess, of the younger, the child in a lot of ways. I know you've maybe made that connection with them, and they are learning coming from the very innocent, feminine, motherly Shire,
Right.
and going out into the big bad world of masculine
Mhm.
battles. And I guess that's very like the process of growing up for a boy.
Hmm. And the skill of using language.
That's true.
I mean, isn't it the case that how much are children today, how much do they actually learn about how to use language? Even reading literature, especially myths and fairy tales and things of that nature. If boys or girls, if they don't even hear the language, if they don't even hear what words sounded like 100 years ago, and um, the language that is we speak now on a daily basis is so diminished that it's heading in the direction of grunts and emojis. There's the language. Our language is being diminished,
Oh
and
yeah.
that's part of, I would say, sword training, word training. We, as men and women,
Mm.
need to cultivate the capacity to use language and to reach
Yeah.
back into our ancestors, to relearn what they
Wow.
knew.
Yeah. And it is a thing that they are trying to diminish. Like I've heard sort of and read sort of articles about expectations of correct language usage being ableist or racist
Mm,
or whatever other ist you wanna put on it. When
mhm.
in reality, no, that's something that you need to function in the world. You need correct language. You need language which is complex. You need language which is going to express a range of ideas. And there's less and less emphasis upon that. And certainly, I was not read a great many of the traditional stories in
No,
school
nor was
or
I.
as a child. Um, and it's not it's not by accident. They are being deliberately sort of shoved down the back of a sofa and lost
Mm,
in inverted commas
mhm.
because there's too much wisdom in them
Yeah.
I
for the ideal
saw,
smartphone society.
yeah, I was shopping some books this spring, and I came across one title about fairy tales. Um, about
About
how
about what? You,
about
I,
fairy tales,
fairy
and
tales.
their
Okay.
yeah, and their effect on society,
Mm.
and how they had been a vital part of Nazi Germany.
Oh God.
Therefore,
Here we
fairy
go.
tales are bad. It was quite an old book, so I do think that might have been one of the first demonizing them. Here in Norway, folk tales are still alive. They're still making audiobooks with
Oh, good.
professional actors and everything.
Great.
But yeah, definitely. Sometimes it can pay off to be a bit of an outpost, as we are. But our literature, classical literature, everything like that, I never really heard that growing up. And as I've mentioned a few times to Katrina now, I have heard of English folklore, folk tales and everything, Jack and the Beanstalk and everything, but I haven't heard the tales themselves.
Hmm.
So, and she has commented that, she hasn't read many of them herself. So they definitely try to
Yeah. Well,
cut
you
us
would sort
off
of
from
get
that.
them. You would get them in altered sort of formats in something we have around Christmas in Britain, which is called a pantomime.
Mm-hmm.
Um, those are sort of like comedic plays. That's commonly where you would experience those stories. They would sort of have add-ons and additions and like deviations to the plot to stop it from getting samey. There were some stories that we were just read, but you know, there wasn't a whole lot of the regional folklore, and it wasn't presented in the traditional style because it was kind of perceived that was boring somehow, that you had to
Mm-hmm.
spice it up. Not sure
Or
why.
twisted.
Yeah, or twist it quite a lot of the time to maybe give it a more egalitarian
Right.
message, or
Mm.
a less gory ending, or
Mm.
something like that, which diminishes some of the metaphorical power of the thing.
Yeah, some of the like the Grimm's fairy tales, the original Grimm's fairy tales. I mean, some of them were pretty scary. That
Yeah.
and a lot of the fairy tales, other fairy tales, the older ones, they were scary because children needed to learn that there were scary things in the world, that they had to understand that life is not safe from birth to death. It's ridiculous to think that or believe that you should be happy all the time for your whole life, and you should never have a bad day or never have uncomfortable feelings. And consequently, we wind up in the world we're in, where just about anything that causes someone to be upset is hate speech.
Yeah.
So just that label, you can call anything hate speech. So pretty soon, there's not going to be anything you're allowed to say, because there's bound to be somebody who,
Yeah.
feels a little upset
Well,
over
yeah.
a word or a story.
Having mixed in the sort of circles that were very into this language and staying up to date with the sort of latest language for a time, where I studied and stuff, I can tell you that it is very much a form of control. The aim of the game is really to keep people so preoccupied with thinking about how they say something that they don't think about what they're saying.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And that
Yeah.
that is how I've observed it to work many times, because there's an ever changing glossary of terminology that you have to keep up with, and it's like it is very similar. I know everyone brings up 1984, but it is very similar
Hmm.
to the constant revising of their dictionary and language that they're doing
Yeah, I
Mm.
was just
to limit
thinking. I was just thinking I might have to make a very short video reading that part of 1984 just to have it up
Mm.
there. Um, like we had last week with Hansel and Gretel, both Hansel and Gretel had to rise to the occasion,
Yeah.
finding their inner strength to get out of that situation. And I've seen so much criticism of folk tales with, oh, they just live happily ever after. No, they don't. They have to read more stories. So many stories start with a king and a queen who loves each other dearly, but they come into some sort of trouble, which is
Mm.
then transferred onto their children
Right.
somehow. Which and that king and queen might have been the prince and princess in another story that
Hmm.
didn't end up living happily ever after. So uh,
Mhm.
I have no idea where that came from. That, oh, we will all have to be
Yeah,
happy all the time for the rest of our
exactly.
lives. Or
Hmm.
if we don't, we have to get a prescription and start
Yeah.
getting pills, you know?
Mm.
And Tolkien is certainly understanding in Lord of the Rings that happiness and continual shelter is not something that is good for the person. Because you see of the hobbits who are constantly in the Shire and in Hobbiton, that they have many faults for never having been exposed to adversity. They can get sort of stuck up and snooty and concerned with very petty things.
Right. And the Shire is really the archetype of the Great Mother, being in the womb, being contained within the womb of the Great Mother, the Garden of Eden, where everything's perfect pretty much, right? They have their little squabbles, but they're all there, they're all partying and hanging out together and drinking beer and smoking weed and having a great time, and not really being aware of the threats that are in beyond the Shire. And so the hobbits who leave the Shire are the manifestation of those men, boys, because the hobbits are like children. They're the size of children of around 5 years old. So we can interpret them in the story as being like children, or even adolescents. At least the hobbits that join the fellowship are like the adolescents that leave the womb of the mother, that protected, safe little place where you never really have to worry about anything. And they go off on this adventure, this hero's journey, through which they become adults. And then they go back to the Shire. And like Bilbo as well. Bilbo was kind of the wise man of his tribe, who was maybe bored with the just, let's stay in the womb forever, and he sought adventure. So off he went and had many adventures, and then came back there and back again and wrote his book that would be the teaching for the rest of the hobbits, for his tribe.
Yeah. And the common denominator is Gandalf, who gave Bilbo that little nudge out of the door. So that might be a good time to play the magician clip. Provided my OBS is actually working with me this time. But if not, it will take me a few seconds to get the clip, so let's try.
Aragorn's relationship with the magician, the inner wise man, portrayed by Gandalf, provides him with intuitive wisdom and foresight. A man in touch with the magician archetype draws guidance from another way of knowing, gleaned through conscious communication with a source of wisdom beyond his own mind. The inner wise man wizard manifests as an insight, synchronicity, or bolt of life-changing information, often arriving out of the blue, but precisely when it means to.
You're late.
As Gandalf instructs Frodo.
A wizard is never late, Frodo Baggins. Nor is he early. He arrives precisely when he means to.
The shaman is akin to this magician archetype and crucial to connecting with the sacred. Eugene Monach addresses this quality in the following excerpt from an essay honoring his work by Thomas R. Smith. Here, Monach is quoted, "It will take a shamanic personality, a type that is emerging once again in our society, to bring about this deeper sense of the sacred. Not philosophers, not priests, not prophets, but shamans are needed. This intimacy with our genetic endowment, and through this endowment, with the larger cosmic process is not primarily the role of the philosopher, priest, prophet, or professor. It is the role of the shamanic personality. A man who listens to his inner Gandalf is accessing his genetic endowment, the wisdom of the ancestors. As a result, he is less susceptible to the kind of hubris that overwhelmed Boromir.
So yeah, quite a few good points there with, that influence that comes and nudges you out of the door, or very much urges you to get going, like he did with Frodo, and his long-standing relationship with Aragorn. He definitely was a very changing aspect for many and a fount of wisdom, but also that you see he still had something to do himself with his fight with the Balrog. So yeah.
Yeah, the wise man within, or that archetype, is essential for a man who would be king, because it is that connection to a deeper source of wisdom that is not of the logos. Logos is important, but that intuitive understanding of things and trust in a higher level of consciousness is what the wise man shaman represents. And in the interaction between Aragorn and Theoden, when the Theoden has given up, he's overwhelmed with despair. It's all over. It's the end. We're all going to die. But in that moment, Aragorn remembers and trusts in Gandalf's words. When Gandalf left, he said, I will, look for my return at dawn on the 5th day. So Aragorn was trusting that part of himself that is the inner wise man, that in spite of everything that's going on around you in your real life, where it looks like it's all lost, we're all going to die, it's horrible, it's the end, that's something, that connection really to the divine, because I think the wise man archetype, the shaman archetype, is the mediator between real life, embodied life, the logos, and this deeper intuitive connection to something greater than ourselves. And it's the trust in that, I believe, is what makes a man great, because it's a trust in the life force itself. And in that scene, just before Aragorn rides out with Theoden, the counsel that Aragorn is able to provide to Theoden is coming out of his trust in that part of himself, that wise man part of himself, even though he doesn't see it yet, because they have to ride out and they have to beat back the orcs before they see Gandalf arriving with the Rohirrim. It's such a powerful scene, that especially the part of the scene where they're coming down the ramp, they're beating off the orcs, and then Gandalf the White appears at the top of the hill and then leads the Rohirrim down the hill. This white glowing character on the white horse is that connection to the divine. And trust in that is what brings that extra courage to actually go forward, even though it looks like you're not going to make it and we're all going to die.
I find it interesting in that scene, or just before, that Aragorn actually forgot. And, he was concerned with getting the women and children to safety and trying to keep Theoden somewhat under control. And then Gimli comes in and say, it's the fifth day.
Yeah, the sun is rising.
Yeah. And then it was just, oh, yeah, yes. And
yeah, it arrives right when it needs to.
exactly.
Like you can't call it out. You can't say, okay, come on, I need my wise man now. Where is it? I need that hit right now. No, that's not the way it works. You have to be ready to receive what comes from that higher level.
And do your best until that happens, until it arrives. You can't just sit around twiddling your thumbs, waiting for the divine to come. And
Yes.
the spiritual is definitely a sorely lacking aspect today. I see that in so many places, and some try to seek back to our pre-Christian roots. Some turn back to the church. Some go for the more pseudo variants of New Age or something. I'm not going to say what path I think people should take, of course, but that longing for something deeper, that spiritual connection and aspect in life is sorely missed by many, even people that don't know it.
Yeah. Absolutely. You see many people who swear that they do not need anything spiritual in their lives, that there is nothing more. But they're very, very unhappy people. Personally, I am a heathen, meaning that I follow the Anglo-Saxon and Norse gods, and I was drawn to that because, again, in that spirituality, I could see masculine representations of divinity. I could see feminine representations of divinity. I could see balance there, and I could see the sort of balance of order and chaos, and an approach to life that also had a balance between, are you going to indulge in the outer world? Yes, but not too much.
Not be taken over by it.
Yeah. I felt like that was personally why I was drawn to that.
I think the underlying component there is, and perhaps a better word to use other than spiritual, because spiritual is kind of a nebulous word, and it's been used in ways that don't really get down to what it actually means. I would say the sacred, that what we all need to do is find the sacred in our own life in whatever way speaks to us. And I think it is very individual. The sacred can be found in lots of traditions and can be found just without even signing up to a particular tradition, but just honoring nature, like to find the sacred in nature. The key is what is sacred in your life, and how do you as an individual honor that in the way that speaks to you, and where you can from that place connect to what Gandalf represents. This inner wise man, this shaman, this place within where the sacred lives. And if we cultivate an ongoing relationship with that part of the self in men and women, that there is this connection, actually a dialogue that we can have internally with whatever imagery speaks to us best, that connects us to the sacred, and therefore we're able to feel a trust in the life force itself, that the life force of the universe is in charge, no matter how bleak our current situation might be. We have to trust in the life force of the universe, one way or another.
Oh, I would just like to say, I agree. Has donated 2 diamonds on D Live and is really enjoying the stream, and says Loralee is full of very great wisdom.
Oh,
And so
well, bless you.
it's a lovely message there.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
and I agree 100%.
Thank you.
I really do love books. So
I do too.
yeah,
And I'm very grateful to those who are willing to listen to this. This is taking people's time. It's not probably high priority on most people's day. So thank you for all of you who are sticking with us here and going through these thoughts and these reflections and ruminations on what is important to us at the level of the sacred.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Our previous stream we had with you is actually one that has a lot of views. So I definitely
great.
take that as a very good sign. People do want this kind of information. They want, at least a certain segment, want to not just have politics and all of that and go into the deeper meaning of life.
And the
So-
purpose. Like, what is the purpose of our life? That's a huge question. I mean, if you just pose that to, let's say, your average normie, they kind of look at you like, what? What do you mean?
Yeah.
And I think that is just horrifying.
I was asking that question as a child. Why am I
Yeah.
here? What's the
Right.
what's the meaning of this life?
Yeah,
And
what are we doing
all
here?
yeah, and all I heard was, well, you get a job so you could buy a house. And I just went, what?
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's it.
then you find a man, get a couple of kids, and most likely will get divorced and everything. But hey, kids, and it was just, what? What is this?
Yeah. And then
so,
the implication from that very diminished life vision of life is that you're supposed to be happy, though.
yeah,
You're supposed. This is what you do. You follow the script. You do this, 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 and this, and then you will be happy for the rest of your life. You'll never have a bad day. It'll all be good. And should any ungood things happen, well, oh boy, we have lots of pharmaceuticals for you.
yeah, and whip out the bubble wrap.
And what?
bubble
Whip
wrap.
out the bubble wrap.
Oh yeah.
To protect you, to I don't know.
Keep you safe in the Shire.
Yeah.
Yeah, but our ancestors used to follow those scripts, and they used to have traditions and ways of life and initiations, but they had a metaphysical basis for why they were doing them.
Yeah.
And that it's very lacking. And they had a clear sort of force that their society was oriented around, and that all of their interpretations of the divine were adapted uniquely to them.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
I guess I just got thinking, like, I had a thought just now about how the different forces may have been placed as head of the pantheon um at different times. Like, there's
Hmm.
evidence to suggest that once the sort of the ruler was, uh, the masculine ruler of the Norse pantheon was Tyr, who's more sort of a protector, warrior, and justice. But then at some point, it shifted to Woden, who is more
Hmm.
of the knowledge seeking, the
Mm.
magician, the shaman, and then which divine force of society is trying to make contact with can shift really
Hmm.
with its needs. Obviously, at a certain point, the type of thing Woden does, where he goes seeking knowledge and he's cunning and he gets things sometimes by trickery, was more needed.
Well,
And
that's like what we
they're
were.
balancing those aspects of
Right.
society, not just as individual men.
Hmm. Yeah, and that comes back to this fourfold structure, that sometimes we need the shaman, the wise man. Other times we need the warrior. Other times we need the lover, and other times we need the leader. And it's it's differentiation that we as human beings, we need to understand the differentiation of things. And this comes back to the language. If our language is so diminished that there's only one word or one sound that is supposed to encompass all of the diverse and myriad aspects of the human psyche that we've been gifted with to actually bring forth and use to apply to circumstances and things that are going on in our reality, our embodied life. Um, this diminishment just in the language has brought us down to a point of being barely functional.
A thought that hit me is more from the books than from the movies,
Hmm.
uh, pertaining to the Shire. As you
Mm.
say, that is the womb. Those who are there are childlike in many ways.
Yeah.
It's also the place where we see most women and most children.
Right.
So it's the aspect that still has the feminine aspect also in that way. And we have our four hobbits who go out for their adventure, finding themselves. And in the meantime, Saruman comes in and
Right.
industrializes the whole place and basically installs a tyranny. And he meets very little resistance.
Hmm.
There's a couple who are eliminated or pushed down, but the other just follows. And I think that is a very good picture on where we are today.
Yeah.
And then we have our hobbits return,
Yeah.
and they're just going, "Hey, hold on, what's going on here? This is crazy and everything."
Yeah.
So they come back as the leaders, those who are able to use their language in a way that they aren't just turned away. They're putting words on what everyone is thinking, but don't dare act upon it. And they're
Yeah.
not having it. They say, no, this is enough, get out. To the outsiders that Saruman has brought in. And with their words, they are able to rouse the people to resist and to gain back their society, to fight for
Mm.
it.
Yeah.
And I do think that is a very important aspect of the story. And I was a bit disappointed it wasn't in the show, in the movies, but I do get why. It was already long enough, but it's a
Right.
very important scene.
It really is. It really is. And I'm so glad you brought it up, Lynx. I think you're right on the mark with comparing that to kind of where we are now, because our entire culture has been infantilized. And
Yeah,
like we've been talking about throughout our conversation here, that this diminishment, this cutting off of initiation rites, keeping the people in an infantile state so that they're completely vulnerable to invasion by evil. And it's left then to the mature ones, the hobbits who leave the Shire and go off to become grown-ups, go off to rise to their greatness, and then come back to help the children rise to their own greatness as well.
yeah,
And that could really, that whole aspect of Tolkien's original work, I think could be very aptly applied to our situation today. That there are members of our community, so to speak, that are maturing, that are coming into their kingship and queenship. And even though we are small in number, when those hobbits come back to the Shire, they they do take care of Sauron and what has happened, the destruction of the Shire, and
yeah,
they reclaim the Shire um, in a new way where life can grow again.
yeah. And I think it's also
Hmm.
a good picture with it's the outsiders who are ruling everything.
Mm,
They are in power, but they might be larger and stronger and everything, but they still wasn't able to hold it, to hold
mm,
their grip on that power when the people were roused. So, as we see today, the powers that are against us, they seem very huge. For many, they seem basically invincible and everything,
yeah,
but they're not.
no, and
We
they are
can,
few. They are
yeah,
few. This is the thing that I that really upsets me about the whole scene we're in. It is just the reality of the fact that the the so-called people who are ruling over us right now are few in number. There's very, very few of them. And we, the people, outnumber them by orders of magnitude.
oh yeah,
And and I really hope that a part of the journey that we're all going through right now, that one of the major realizations, and I think it's starting to happen, that the people are starting to realize, hey, wait a minute, there's way more of us than there is of them,
yeah,
and how it's being seen now comes largely through the worldwide March for Freedom that happened last Saturday around the world, cities around the world, with thousands of people marching against this tyranny that is
yeah,
being imposed on us. And and the numbers of people now are growing daily that are
yeah,
starting to say, look, uh, we're not going to obey, like the truckers in Australia going on strike and
yeah,
stopping all. Okay, y'all are going to, bring the hammer down on us. Well, guess what? Screw you. We're not going to play the game.
mm,
And hospital workers and nurses and doctors and firefighters. I mean, that's been happening here a lot where I am. The professions, people who actually do the work in the society, who actually do take care of people and things, and are the protectors, are standing up and saying, enough. No, you will not force us to abide by your tyrannical ideology, and we're not gonna play. So if more and more people, especially professionals, because that they're on the target list now. I mean, they're coming after all the healthcare workers, no matter what they're doing in the healthcare realm, even people who don't even work in the hospitals, who are doing like tech work at home, even they are being told, you either take the shot or you're out of a job, which is just completely insane. And I think the people
Absolutely.
are starting to see this, like, what? Okay, like, is this really about protecting human health? No. So this notion of and the imagery of that, Tolkien's depiction of what happened to the Shire, and how the hobbits who were initiated came back and brought it back to a place of nurturance. This is what gives me hope in our time.
Yeah. It's definitely good to see something is finally starting to move.
Right at the last minute, it seems.
Well,
Gee whiz.
that's always how it is, isn't it?
It is. Oh gosh, yeah.
You know,
We really wait until things get drastic. I've read a lot of history.
yeah.
They
Yeah.
assume it's gonna be fine until it isn't.
Yeah, and isn't it sort of like the little the hobbits? Like, you're gonna have fun and enjoy yourself and party and not think about the bad things going on elsewhere, until it's right at your doorstep. And then there is something in the human spirit. I call it the Promethean Spirit. Something that is built in, that is a part of the human psyche, the human experience, that there is this Promethean spirit, that when tyranny has descended upon us, that this innate force of nature rises up within us and defies the ruling order, like Prometheus did when he challenged Zeus. And I've seen, or I was expecting to see, this Promethean spirit rise up as a consequence of the winter solstice of 2020, last year, because there was a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in Aquarius. And Aquarius, the myth for Aquarius is the myth of Prometheus. And when I saw that powerful conjunction occurring, it gave me hope and trust that there is something built in, that we have it within us. And yes, it's been squashed and repressed and all the rest of it, but when the life force itself is threatened, this thing comes up within us, whether we like it or not, in many ways, because it's not easy to saddle up with the Promethean spirit. I mean, Prometheus was severely punished for challenging Zeus. He was chained up to a rock on a far off mountain peak and had Zeus's eagle eat out his liver every day, which certainly was not enjoyable. And what does that mean for us now? We're kind of like that. That the spirit has been awakened. It is manifesting, and just seeing the marches around the world and so forth. That is the Promethean spirit rising up. But based on the Greek myth, that they're not going to just roll over. The foe is not going to just roll over and say, "Oh well, the Promethean Spirit is here. Okay, we give up." Oh no, they're not going to give up. They will use their powers to try to chain us up on a rock on a far off mountain peak and have the equivalent of the eagle chew out our liver every day. I mean, some things we could think about there, I believe, have a lot to do with the assault on our physical health. So that's another whole, domain of study. But certainly there is an attack going on our physical well-being. So
Yeah.
even if it wasn't this experimental injection, all the other environmental contaminants and the things we've already mentioned, that's still going on. So
Uh,
this Promethean spirit, though, it is going to continue and is going to continue to rise up and gather steam in spite of the suffering that we might be experiencing even on a daily basis, including our physical health and other aspects of the dilemmas that we're in. Now, in 2025, Pluto, the planet of transformation and metamorphosis, will enter for the duration of its travels through Aquarius. That will be in November 20th, 2024. So in the next couple of years, though, Pluto, it's right now it's working through the last degrees of Capricorn. And in the course of that, the planets go through what they call a retrograde cycle, where it appears from our vantage point at Earth, it appears that the planets go backwards in their orbits, which of course they don't do in real life. But symbolically, what it means is that when a planet goes retrograde, it backs up to review a period of time that it has previously been traveling. And so starting in 2024, so let me see if it does oh wait, no, it does a little dip in to Aquarius in March of 2023. And that will be like the beginning of the next wave, we could say, of the Promethean spirit, moving into human consciousness. But that's a couple of years away. I think we all have to be prepared to be doing battle in this situation that we're in, that we're going to have to keep fighting. We're going to have to stay strong. We're going to have to keep fighting and trusting that there is a purpose and a meaning to all of this, that we are all here at this time because we are being called to our greatness, and that this is the purpose of our life now, to ensure that there is life in the next few years. So Pluto, as the planet of metamorphosis, we are undergoing a metamorphosis right now. We're not caterpillars anymore. We can't go back to the way things were. There is no back from here. And I think this is really hard for a lot of people who still are believing or hoping that well, it'll be back. We're going to go back to normal pretty soon, 2 weeks to flatten the curve. And now we're just about 2 years in. Well, it's going to be 3 years and 4 years, and they're never going to let this go until the people claim their sword and stand up and say, no, there is no going back. And I think this is hard for all of us to comprehend, because while you're undergoing metamorphosis, I mean, think of the caterpillar becoming the butterfly. The caterpillar's body becomes the food for the growing butterfly. The caterpillar life is over, and we cannot go back to that. And it's requiring of us, I would say, some significant grieving for the dream of whatever future we might have been imagining for ourselves and for the world. That's gone. It's gone. We have to shed that caterpillar skin and surrender to this process of metamorphosis, trusting that in the course of the next few years, we will all be initiated into the equivalent of butterflyness. We're having to enter into a time in human history that has not been before. And we don't know what that is right now. We don't know what that looks like. At the very end of The Lord of the Rings, and after the big war and everything, and Aragorn's crowned king, he basically says, okay, we are now at the new age of men.
Yes, and the elves, the immortal beings,
Yep.
they leave. And
Yep.
I think that relates sort of to the Yugas to me. Like the elves, the immortal beings, would have been around during a golden age. And perhaps they stayed in a silver age as well. But the Lord of the Rings universe has clearly gone on to an age of men, maybe an Iron Age, and so that wasn't even the biggest tribulation that it's going to face. Like that world is still yet to have its Wolf Age, and I believe personally that what we are in now is the Wolf Age of this world, and that's something that we look at all the ancient texts. You know, we can get a good idea of what that entails. But it is something where we're going to have to be prepared to accept that life is not going to be as pleasant for us as it was for many of our ancestors, and we can't go back to, say, the 50s. We can't go back to the Viking days when everybody just used to, have that sort of society. We have to create something which is now suitable for the age that we're actually in. Which unfortunately it's the bad one.
Yeah, I was actually contemplating that earlier today as I was taking a walk. I'm not sure if everyone knows, but almost all restrictions has been lifted in Norway since last night, late afternoon. I'm not sure if it was me or if it was the air, but there seems to be something that lifted a darkness, sort of lifted a bit during the evening. But that could also be me, frankly speaking, that I'm starting to relax slightly. I don't trust them, but at least I can have a breather.
Yeah.
And I was thinking, for the sake of argument, say that they won't reintroduce any restrictions, and we quote unquote go back to normal. That's not possible with what's been done psychologically to people.
Right.
So maybe the next purely healthy generation will be the grandchildren of those who are born this year.
Born in
And
2020.
yeah, and by that time, the world as we have known it will be gone.
Right.
It will be forever changed for good or bad, whatever happens. So what we can do, as we can't go back, what we can do is finding the strength within ourselves, helping to guide other people, and try to create a better future, something better than what was in 2019, for that was definitely not good. And also, I do think the powers that shouldn't be have been in a hurry.
Mm-hmm.
That was something I picked up on in 2015 with the
Ah.
so-called migrant crisis. Then it
Oh,
became
yeah.
obvious that, oh my
Yeah.
God, they're just putting pedal to the metal, so to speak.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
What are they doing? Because that was a major gamble on their part. And definitely the same now. Going completely overboard. I do think they are predicting all of the rallies and protests and everything. But it's very clear that they're in a hurry, and that might actually be down to astrology, that they want to do something within a certain energy.
Uh-huh.
And it's quite
Could well
interesting.
be.
What?
No, just could well be. Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting
Just
that they're using those for.
Yeah, and interestingly enough, the IMF has done deals with the Western world last year when the first lockdown and everything to keep the economy afloat.
Oh, yeah.
And all of them last until 2025, which is interesting
Yeah.
and also very telling.
Mm.
So, yeah, we're still in for a ride, but I do think we'll make it to the other side. I don't think they
Yep.
will win.
Certainly.
Yeah. Evil destroys itself in the end. But
And
we
you
can't
can
just sit
see it.
around waiting. We have to
Mm.
be taking action from the standpoint of simply understanding and becoming more conscious of what are the weapons that are being used against us, because this is not traditional warfare. We are the victims of psychological warfare and really other types
Mm.
of warfare, quiet weapons for silent wars, and we're under attack. I mean, it's been going on for years, but because they're not using these traditional weapons, they're using these other things. And it seems to me that the psychological warfare has worked so well for them that they're filled with hubris. It's the hubris factor again. And the foe are looking around thinking, oh my God, look at this, we got them all wearing masks and hiding under the bed in their house. How good is that? Well, geez, let's roll out the experimental injections and see if they'll bite on that. And lo and behold, so it's like
Yeah.
dog training. So they've let us off the leash. What you were just saying, Lynx, actually played out right here where I am earlier in the summer. So in July, the foe lifted all the restrictions. Okay, everybody, you're free now. You can do whatever you want. You can go places. You can gather. We're not going to enforce this mask BS, except in certain situations. But nevertheless, a lot of the restrictions were lifted, and so just like a dog that's let off the leash, if you have a dog and you let it go to the dog park and let it off the leash, whoopee, boy, it's fun. Those dogs are galloping around and having a great time, and they forgot what it was like to be on the leash. And And so that is in a way, it's a kind of a distraction, because it's like the carrot. Okay, kids, here's your little treat. But now, I mean, it just happened here a couple of weeks ago. Now we're right back down in hardcore lockdown, and they're rolling out vaccine passports.
Yeah.
So and even when they swore by God to, I mean, literally, the fat little demon who's the premier of the province where I live, during the summer, he literally said, "This is it. Where all restrictions are lifted. We will not be going back. I promise." And he actually made the sign of the cross. I mean, talk about sacrilege. And that's all over now. Now we're really in prison. And so just what you said, links of what's
Yep.
going on there. I wouldn't trust them.
Yeah.
And I think, but it does, what it does do for us though, is bring up to the forefront this idea of psychological warfare. I mean, we need to understand that that's what's going on, that this is not about human health. This is warfare.
Yeah.
And we, the victims of that warfare, have been slow to figure this out and accept the fact that we are victims of war. And we've got to understand what are the weapons that are being used against us. And then we have to, rally our warrior, our inner warrior and outer warrior, to fight the battles that are before us. We're not the battles of the past. We're not fighting the battles of the 20th century. This is a whole new ballgame. This is asymmetrical warfare.
Yeah,
And you mentioned,
how many times have we fought Hitler now?
yeah, right.
Everyone is a new Hitler, so
Yeah,
But
right.
didn't we defeat him a few decades back? It's so silly.
Yeah. So they've just, they just changed their costume, and now they're rolling out the same program over and over again. And that's an important point as well. It's the same program, whether it was Hitler or Mao or Stalin or Mussolini or Pol Pot or any of the other tyrants in the history of the world. It's the same program. You divide and conquer the people. You create conflict within, both internally in the individual and then within the society. You castrate the men, and you put the women into a place where they no longer want to bring forth life. Like in Lord of the Rings, all the mothers die of grief when they're touched by evil. And I think that is a part of the psychological warfare that has been visited upon women these days. I mean, like the just fear of, good grief, do I really want to bring a child into this world?
Yeah, I've
Or
thought
they
that.
abandon their femininity altogether and just say, well, I don't want to be a mother. I don't want to grow up. I just want to, dye my hair purple and march around in a pussy hat. So this is the psychological warfare is what we really have to look into. And I also would, before I forget, I wanted to just touch in on the significance of the elves.
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking of the elves as representations of the higher levels of consciousness to which human beings are capable of reaching. So that elvishness, elven consciousness, it is what we are capable of. And the whole story there, when the elves leave for the Undying Lands, I see that as a symbol of integration. It's like the men of the West having fought the battles and Aragorn becoming king. The next stage is, okay, you have to integrate elvishness and connect with that as an inner process so that the elves are within, and we have the capacity to essentially be like elves. And we are now in this transition, if you will, to reclaiming the sacred and the knowledge of the potential. That would be the purpose of our life, is to attain elvishness in our real life, to integrate what elvishness means. It is the symbolism at the end there.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Personally, I've always favored the elves.
Mm-hmm.
In stories like that, I find them more inspirational. So I've definitely been one of those who are looking for integration of the more higher aspects.
Yeah, it's what we can
Wow.
aspire to. They're the
Yeah.
symbols of what we can aspire to. I really love the scene of going to Lothlorien when the hobbits are meeting Galadriel for the first time, and the way the elves live in the trees, and to me that represented the capacity that we have to live in complete harmony with nature. Like we could do that. We have all the technology, we have all the knowledge, we have everything it would take to transition our culture, our world, into something that would be in harmony with nature without returning to the cave. Because again, we cannot go back. We are not going to be living like hobbits. That's not possible now. We can use our technology. See, without the forces of evil dominating everything and using the technology against us, we can take that knowledge and wisdom and technology and build a world that is in harmony with all of nature, like Rivendell and Lothlorien represent.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think we've gone from men tonight, and we've extrapolated it really to the importance of everybody
Mm-hmm.
picking up that sword and integrating that warrior, that fight. And I think it is a really good point to end on,
Mm-hmm.
that sort of call for the balance and restoration of nature.
Yeah. I would also make one finishing point. Men are sorely needed these days. And the balanced masculine principle. Personally, I've always missed that since I was a little girl. And I really long to see that come back into the world. And us women, we have to stand behind our men
That's
when they
right.
stand up, and we will fight them together and win.
Yeah.
We will make our stand together.
That's right.
Yeah. So this
Indeed we
has
will.
been a wonderful conversation as always. We could probably have 10-hour-long streams and just talking and talking and talking.
It has been wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for coming. And we
Yes.
have a show on femininity upcoming in a couple of weeks.
Yes,
I
we
don't
do.
have the date on the top of my head. I think it's the 10th of October.
Yeah,
I think it is.
that's what I have. Mhm.
Yeah. And yeah, really looking forward to having you back again.
Likewise, I'm really
Indeed.
looking forward to talking again, and thank you to your listeners and contributions from them. Yeah, it's great to know that we're not alone.
Absolutely. So that's it,
The
folks, for
paradox
tonight.
says keep going. Oh my goodness, the paradox. We would be here all night. We would be here all night. Oh dear. There certainly is a lot to talk about, and we will be exploring femininity on the 10th of October, which is a topic that we would love to hear input from the ladies who watch the stream about, and the men should tune in too,
Mm-hmm.
because as we've established, it is important for both men and women to understand both sides of the sexes
Sure
and of
is.
the nature.
Yes,
Absolutely.
sure is.
That's how we find each other, that's how we bond, and that's how we get to an understanding. We have to understand each other for that.
Yes.
Yeah,
Well, good night, folks. We hope you've enjoyed the stream. And
absolutely.
thank you for everyone who's given lemons, including I Agree, Ratus Swedicus, and JK160 on D Live. Good
Yes.
night to the YouTube crowd. Timmy Bob was lurking.
Next Sunday, we have our introduction show on Dante's Inferno, which
Yes,
I
we
do
Great.
think will be pertinent also to what we've talked about today.
Yeah.
That's a series we're starting, so that should be interesting.
Yes.
So,
Well, and I would just invite anyone who's listening who's interested in, more of this, to watch my series on my website. I think you probably put it somewhere um, in the chat or whatever. And I also welcome any comments. Anyone who wants to contact me. My email is on my website, and I really would appreciate and enjoy any comments or further ideas that any of your listeners might have.
yeah, the link is in the description on YouTube video. I will post
Yes.
it in the D-Live chat, or maybe Katrina can do that very shortly. Definitely go watch her videos. They are really interesting, not only on femininity and masculinity, but also on the Shire, on the Ring, and all of that. So it's definitely a deep dive that I highly recommend.
Great.
Yeah, thank you
All
so
right.
much.
Well, blessings to everyone. And this has been a wonderful conversation.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for coming.
Absolutely.
You
Wonderful to
bet.
have you again. And
Well, thank
good
you.
night, folks.
Okay.
Good night, everyone.
Bye to all.